Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Conversations with Cabral. Our guest expert of the week is Terry Real, the author of The New Rules for Marriage. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a great joy to be here.
It's great to have you on. It was actually just fortuitous that my wife was talking about reading your book and listening to your audio, also called Fierce Intimacy as well. And she said, you really need to listen to this author, this speaker. And I said, okay, who is it? Because I'm always interested. I love being able to, develop myself as well. Like, I just simply believe that we shouldn't stay static, because if we stay static, then we're moving backward in life. And this is not an area, to be honest with you, that I've done a lot of work, I would say, recently. I've had to do a lot of work in the past to get to where I am. There's no doubt about it, but it hasn't been recent for me. So for me to bring it top of mind was an absolute pleasure, and did a lot for me. And I know it will for my relationship with my wife as well. But what I want to do before we get into all of these topics, I want you to be able to tell people, essentially who you are and what you do, because you are now one of the most, I would say, world-renowned relationship experts out there. So please do feel free to share a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my name is Terry Real. I've written a number of books. The New Rules of Marriage for Couples is the last one. Back in the 90s, I wrote a book called I Don't Want to Talk About It, which was the first book ever written on male depression. Before that book, depression was seen as a woman's disease. And I'm happy for my part in bringing out male depression into the psyche. I began getting calls from around the country saying, is there somebody in Topeka or New York or wherever that does the kind of work featured in that book? And for a while, I would refer them as best I could. But eventually I said, look, if you're crazy enough and you have the resources, come to my home. I live in Boston, Mass. And we'll spend 2 days together. What I developed is what I call a relational intervention. Now it's on video. People used to fly in from wherever, spend 2 days with me. At the end of our 2 days together, you're back on track or you're getting a divorce. This is the last stop. And what I found is that I had a pretty good, I'd say 18, 19 out of 20 couples would be saved. Not fixed, but saved from divorce. And then I'd send them back home with a treatment program. I began to teach what I was doing in these interventions because I broke just about all the rules I had learned in couples therapy school about how to do couples therapy, and it worked. And I already was teaching, and I was a writer. So rather than tear myself apart for my unorthodoxy, I said, what's working here? And I created a school of therapy called Relational Life Therapy, RLT. And we've a foundation. I do training for, several thousand therapists around the world each year. And we just now, I'm opening up my first internet course for the general public. It's always been for therapists in the past. So I'm very excited about reaching out. And I'm also finishing a book that will be out a year from now. March 22nd is the pub date. The name of the book is called Us. How moving relationships beyond you and me creates love, passion, and understanding. And it's really about stop thinking of yourself as an individual and start thinking of your relationship as a team. It's the difference, for example, Stephen, between I need more sex in this relationship versus we deserve a healthier sex life. What should we do about it? So I'm really teaching the lay public how to think like a family therapist, how to think systemically. I talked about moving from ego to eco, how to think ecologically about the marriage or long-term relationship that is your own.
I like that a lot. Because in natural health, and I agree with it, there's a big movement to help people become their own doctor. It's understanding how your body works so that you don't give over all of your power to your doctor, that you have some say in this as well, because I think empowerment is one of the big keys. I would love to know maybe just a couple of those rules that you broke, like what makes you different, because there's a lot of relationship therapists out there and counselors, but you obviously are doing something right. What's different?
Yeah. Well, a number of things. First of all, I don't do the neutral professional stony-faced traditional therapist thing. What relational life therapy is about is teaching men and women and non-binary people as well how to be relational, how to live a life that is connected to yourself, first of all, your own self-esteem, your love for yourself, to your wants and your needs and your feelings, how to be really in touch with who you are and have a good relationship with you. And then the next phase, of course, is how to have a good relationship with others. So I literally teach people how to be connected in their lives. And I have a kind of a specialty in working with men and men's issues, but my love is couples and teaching men and women how to be intimate with one another, and same sex, of course, as well. So the job is intimacy. I'm an intimacy merchant. I sell increased closeness between men and men, women and women, and men and women.
That's some amazing work. I would love to know. Now, you did kind of maybe link to it a little bit. 18, 19 out of 20 couples or so were able to at least see that light and be able to then go home and do the work because, of course, anything worthwhile does take quite a bit of work. But would you say, let's go over how many people do you think that you've seen and really worked with, as an estimate, of course, and do you believe after all the years and all the people that you've seen that all relationships can be repaired?
No. I've seen thousands of couples over 30 plus years, and I don't consider successful couples therapy necessarily saving the marriage. I see successful couples therapy as ending the vicious circle that they repeat over and over and over again unto death. If I can break up that choreography, to be straight up, she pursues and he distances. And I teach my students and general public to say the more, the more. That's the pattern. The more she pursues, the more he distances. The more he distances, the more she pursues. The more he overfunctions, the more of a wreck she is. The more of a mess she is, the more of a caretaker. See, these things loop. I want that loop, that negative loop, to break up. And ideally, I wanted to turn into a charm loop. The more he opens his heart and shares, the more receptive she is and appreciative, and the more that's turning a negative loop into a positive loop. That's what I'm after. But there's some relationships that don't make it. One of the other rules that I break in RLT, Relational Life Therapy, is we take sides. Not all problems are 50-50. Some problems are 70-30. Some problems are 99-1. I had a gal, her husband was an untreated, unmedicated, bipolar, raging alcoholic. And I'm telling you, man, her quote unquote contribution to their misery, which she lived there. That was her big contribution, as far as I'm concerned. Not all. So we call it like we see it. We're quite capable of saying, hey, Mrs. Jones, you're a nut, and Mr. Jones, you're an even bigger nut, and here's why. So we're truth tellers. And most therapists are taught not to tell the truth to our clients. We're taught to be nice and nurturing above all. I can't tell you how many times I look at somebody, I go, okay, hey, look, I can be nice to you or I can save your marriage. Which would you prefer right now?
Right. And then it's their choice. Right. So what I would say is there are a lot of people out there, though, who they're stuck in a cycle right now and they just simply can't break it, meaning that they each have dug in their heels and they're saying, well, this person's doing this and then the other person's doing this. And they're not really thinking, as you said, about the team, the unit, the relationship itself, and maybe how they used to get along 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and that it was kind of just a slow, gradual decline. Well, you do something that's, I think, really unique. And you begin to get people to understand what type of person they are based on their adaptive child, I believe is what you refer to it as. Some people say inner child, adaptive child. And then from that, you can realize that's your go-to. And your partner most likely has, well, it could be the same, but a different go-to. And that's what you're reacting to. Could you dig a little bit deeper in this?
Yeah. There are three parts to our minds. There is the wounded child part, which tends to be very young. That's the part that people do trauma work with generally. A little 3, 4, 5 years old on the receiving end of the trauma. And just the wounded child part of it just wants to crawl up on somebody's lap and be held and cry for about 1,000 years. That's the very reactive, very young part of it. In the prefrontal cortex, the most mature part of the brain, is the wise adult part of us. The part of us that's here and now, that can be thoughtful, that can stop and use a skill, that can stop and take a breath rather than discharge. That's our wise adult brain over here. And in between these two is what I call the adaptive child part of you. That's the part of you that adapted to whatever the bent or craziness or unique qualities of your childhood growing up. People think that the adaptive child is a grown-up, but it's not. It's a kid in grown-up's clothing. And it tends to be black and white, unforgiving, perfectionistic, rigid, harsh, certain, as opposed to the wise adult, which has nuance, which understands human foibles, which is more of a mature part of us. Now, when we get triggered, I'm going to talk about what that word means in a minute, but when we get triggered, we lose the higher functioning of the brain, and we move into the limbic system. We move into the emotional parts of the brain, and we're no longer here and now and thoughtful. We're reactive. It's knee-jerk response. I call it first consciousness, or whoosh, WHOOSH. Whoosh comes up from the. Now, I'm a fighter, and my wife is a fighter. We both come from violent families, actually. And her whoosh is anger, and my whoosh is anger back. And on a good day, if I came home and I was met with a lot of self-righteous indignation, my first instinct, my adaptive child automatic response, is to fight back. I really want to bop her in the nose, but I like to say, being a feminist and an educated man, I would regale myself to verbal abuse. Okay, who the hell do you think you are? Now, on a good day, while all that stuff comes up, another voice comes into my head, because I've learned to listen to it. And that voice says, stop, breathe, calm the hell down. Just because Belinda's having a bad day doesn't mean that you have to have a bad day. Be independent, have some boundaries. Now, what's useful? Honey, I'm sorry. Let's sit down and talk. That's the wise adult. And one of the first skills that I teach everybody is what we call relational mindfulness. When you're triggered, when you're in that first consciousness knee-jerk response, stop, take a breath, call a timeout, go for a walk around the block, go into the bathroom, splash some water on your face, do some breathing. Breathing is very good. A friend of mine, Thomas Ubel, a German mystic, has a saying, urgency is our enemy and breath is our friend. Breathe yourself down, breathe yourself in the center. Now that you're compos mentis, now go ahead and interact. The first skill is shifting out of that triggered, immature part of the brain to a present, here and now, thoughtful part of the brain. It's only the wise adult part of us that will use relational skills. It's only the wise adult part of us that wants intimacy. The adaptive child part of us is not interested in intimacy, is interested in self-preservation down the line. You know, I have a saying, you can be right or you can be married. What's more important to you? I asked the adaptive child part of you that, right, more important down the line. So we got to get out of that triggered space into a more centered space and then go deal with our I give workshops. I used to give workshops around the country. Now my students do. We have a bunch of slides. My favorite slide of the whole workshop is this one. Other workshops teach you skills. We deal with the part of you that won't use them.
That's great. Really great. Yeah, and I would love to be able to go a little bit more, because there's essentially, I know that there's 4 parts to it, but there's 2 different sides. There's the boundaryless, which I think I probably relate more to. And then my wife being more of the walled off, that part of it. Because for me, I mean, I just come in like a hurricane. My personality is forceful and loud, and, I love to talk right away. I want to externally process everything. And for her, she wants time to think. She wants time alone. She wants to be able to process everything before we start having a conversation, which is also great, but it's so different from my personality that I immediately think something's wrong if she's not willing to talk about it, where that's not necessarily the case, right? And so talk just a little bit more about that, since it's obviously your work and I'm trying to paraphrase here.
No, that's good. Well, what you're talking about is boundary profile.
Yes.
Your internal boundary, your psychological boundary is where it's like your skin. It's where you end and the world begins. And some people, health is in the middle. When you have a healthy boundary, it's supple, it's nuanced. So you're connected to the person, but you're self-protecting both at the same time. You're not just an open door. If you're boundaryless, you're too open, you're too porous. Somebody says, oh, you look kind of heavy, you go on a diet. Somebody says, your jokes aren't funny, you stop telling jokes. Et cetera. So you just take it in. Boundaryless is like being cold-blooded. It doesn't mean you're cold. Most boundaryless people are quite warm, actually. But it means you're the temperature of the rock that you're on. Mm-hmm. The stimulus determines how you. If you feel bad about me, I feel bad about me. There's nothing in between us. So that's being too open, too porous. Boundaryless people tend to be quite reactive. They get triggered very quickly and very easily. On the other side of the equation are people who live behind walls. And a wall is different than a boundary. If you're in a proper boundary, you're engaged in the conversation, you're sifting through it, you're saying, what am I going to take in and what am I going to keep out? That's what a boundary does. You say to me, Terry, it's been a great conversation. Yeah, I'll take that in. And you're a really boring presenter. I think that's Stephen's stuff. I don't think that's what a boundary will do for you. Mm-hmm. You don't have one. Stephen says you're a lousy presenter and I give up my career. What can I say? I go into a 3-day depression. Walled off is the other extreme. My kids used to say, talk to the hand because the face don't give a damn. That's walled off. I'm not listening to you at all. I'm totally self-protected, but I'm not connected. If you're boundaryless, you're connected, but you're not protected. If you're walled off, you're protected, but you're not connected. A supple boundary, which I can teach, maybe we'll even do a little exercise. A subtle boundary will leave you connected to the person and still able to take care of yourself at the same time. So it's very useful to know what boundary profile you tend toward, not the adult part of you, but that adaptive child part of you when you're triggered. You go to boundaryless, you go to walled off. And if you go here and she goes there, what's the dynamic between you? Now, if you're boundaryless and your wife, may I play? And your wife is
absolutely.
Left to your own resources, the dynamic would be a pursuer-distancer dynamic.
That's correct, yes.
The more she withdraws, the more you pursue, the more you pursue, the more she withdraws. Now, you may have intervened on that, but that would be your default.
That's, correct. So I always call myself a, recovering, I would say, boundaryless and up, because you go up and down as well in your book, or which I actually listened to, which was Fierce Intimacy. And I can't recommend enough everyone do the same. So you start to learn more about yourself and your partner. And then obviously then you can take your relationship to that next level. But I was like, oh yeah, that's me. I'm definitely the boundaryless and up if I'm not self-aware. And now I simply try to be more self-aware and just say, oh, okay, that's the pattern I'm falling back into. Because as you said, that is my adaptive child, because I would say I grew up more maybe a walled off household. So now I'm like revolting back towards that, saying, hey, look at me over here.
I would say it a little bit differently. I would say if you, and you can pass or stop any of this, I guess, too personal, but I would say that you grew up in a walled-in family, and that, you see, when somebody hangs out in the boundaryless position, not always, but often the predictable wound that they're compensating for is emotional abandonment. If you had parents who were walled off and didn't attend to your emotional life as closely as they could have, you're on your own, you grow up hungry, you grow up starving, and you want. And what's really interesting is the adaptive child is often the opposite of what the parent was. So your parents are walled off, you were abandoned, you're prone to feeling abandoned. If you have what we would call an anxious, insecure attachment style, and you would go after her. Her distance would read to you as worrisome. You'd be distressed by her distance, and you'd want to bridge it.
Sure.
Her wound, if you hang out on the walled off side, tends to be more about, well, there are two ways. One is you can be walled off because you grew up in a family where everybody was walled off, and what's the problem? What is all this intimacy? Who cares about intimacy? That's one way to do it. The more prevalent way, though, is you're reacting to the opposite wound. If you, boundaryless Stephen, are reacting to being abandoned in some ways by your parents, your wife, I don't know, I've never laid eyes on her, but one might imagine, is reacting to the wound of intrusion. I don't know. She would be a caretaker, or there would be somebody that she had to deal with in a way if she's that type 2 avoidant. Or she's a type 1 avoidant where everybody grew up with walls, so what's the problem? Which one is it with her?
So I can't speak for her, not on a public podcast for sure. But you're saying that there would be someone, like she would have to be caring for someone else during her childhood, is what you're saying? Yeah, that's one possibility.
The core wound when you're walled off tends to be what we call enmeshment, enmeshment. And enmeshment means that the energy, instead of going from the parent into the child, goes from the child into the parent.
I see.
So you have a volatile parent, or you have a controlling parent, or you have a parent that insists that you're a super performer, but you're complying to their wishes. And when you grow up, you're not interested in complying to people's wishes. You're interested in preserving your autonomy. That's the classic way that somebody operates behind walls.
That's interesting. So basically saying, just because I want to make sure I understand as well, because I have actually met quite a number of people too in my practice where they are, so as a child, they had to put everyone else's needs first, and they didn't get to be a child how they wanted to be a child. And so now as an adult, they want some of that autonomy that they were never able to have as a child. They want to be able to do something. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And also, when you've been used as a child, and it could be quite, look, here's what I say. You want to hear the most destructive phrase I can think of in the English language?
Sure.
Honey, you understand me better than your father.
You understand me better than your father.
Better than your father does.
Huh.
You're more understanding of me than your father is.
What's the message behind that?
The message is that we're closer, son and mother, than I am to my husband. And it's a way in which the child is made to feel special. They're heroes, but they're being used. And at some cellular level, you know you're being used. And when you grow up with a template of relationships that is, it's not about me, it's about them. And so relationships, we all need relationships. We're wired that way. But if you're worried about being suffocated, once you're in the relationship, it's about keeping the other person at arm's length much of the time. If you're boundaryless, the wound is abandonment. You feel lonely. And so it's the opposite. When somebody distances, you want to go after them. Suffocation for the walled off one, and abandonment for the boundaryless one.
That's really interesting. And I would say that, and you probably saw this in your practice, but just correct me if I'm wrong, that there's all different spectrums of that, meaning that, we have that to degrees, you're 10% of that, or on worst case scenario, you're 100% of that. That makes like total sense. Would you say that's correct?
I would say the most important question I ask a couple, or I think about when I'm sitting with a couple, is which part of you am I talking to? So that your wife may not live behind walls all the time, but her adaptive child lives behind walls all the time. And so you don't get her behind walls until she's triggered. And then that's where she would go. Just like if you get triggered, if you get upset, it's not because you're being smothered, it's because you're being lonely. And so that would set you off. So I like to say 364 days out of the year, I assume you're in your wise adult, but that one day where you screw up, where are you going to go? And you go to boundaryless and she goes to walls.
That's a great way of putting it. That makes a lot more sense too. It's always there, and then whatever you're triggered by, then that's when it comes out. So that makes a lot of sense. So the goal now is first understanding your go-to, where you go to, and then after that, it's understanding these are the triggers that cause you then to get back to that adaptive child, to seek out whatever that demand that the child is looking for. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's your knee-jerk response, that adaptive child. In 40 years, I've only found 3 automatic responses: fight, flight, or fix. And I'd ask your viewers to take a moment and out themselves to themselves. Are you a fighter? Are you a fleer? And let me be clear, you can be sitting 6 inches away from somebody and fleeing. It's called stonewalling. Or are you a fixer? And a fixer is, oh my God, there's some tension here. Let me take it away. I can't stand it. It's not a responsible, let me work on the relationship. It's like, I'm a codependent. You're upset. I got to get your upset out of the way because I'm boundaryless. If you're upset, I'm upset and I got to get out of it. So fight, flight, or fix. I'm a fighter.
Yeah, I would say I'm the same. Yes.
You're a fighter.
Yes.
That one up piece.
It's interesting because I would say that, but also the fixer, like I don't want things to be wrong ever. And so for me, if I make my wife upset because of just, again, being a hurricane that comes in, I talk for a living all day and she's like, how are you still talking when you get home? Because I'm talking when I'm home as well. And so it's funny because my oldest daughter is a lot like that. So we'll be having conversations just back and forth at the dinner table. My wife will just be looking at us like, what are you guys doing? But at the same time, again, like I am definitely someone who just wants to make sure that she's good, at all times. Like, you good? You good? You're not good? Can I help? Can I fix it? And I know that, of course, and I'm being stereotypical here, but sometimes as a guy, and I know you've pointed this out before, I want to problem solve. I'm like, what's wrong? Let's work through this together. I can help in any way that I can. And she's not really looking for that.
No, a lot of women aren't looking for that. A lot of women in particular. I did a piece for O Magazine on the 3 types of listeners. The 3 types of listeners. That you just named one, problem solving. That tends to be guys. Another is empathic listening, which tends to be women, and certainly what women want. And the third is sharing listening. That's I'm a New Yorker and I'm Jewish. It's all shared. Hey, your adolescent son, you should see my adolescent. Your knee, oh my God, my back. That's sharing. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of these 3 forms of listening and responding. What's wrong is that the speaker wants one kind of listener and the listener doesn't know that and is doing a different kind of listening. So she wants empathy. He says, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And she's ready to rip his head off. And I have to teach men in particular to stop referencing so-called objective reality. Well, that's valid. Well, that's not valid. Take a breath and instead be there with compassion to your partner's subjective experience. If your listeners get only this from the call, trade in this is valid and that's not valid. And well, you have to understand that aliens came from the sky, and drop all that and just surrender to empathy for your, hey, honey, that sounds shitty. I'm sorry. I can see how you would feel like that. And it doesn't cost you anything, but you have to yield. And men don't yield. Men are taught not to yield. Men are taught to equate yielding with weakness and weakness with unmanliness. And so I do a lot of work with guys, teaching them how to open their hearts, open their throats, be more expressive, and be more cherishing. Less problem solving, more compassion and TLC and empathy. And things go a lot better.
No,
one of the things I say is that every heterosexual relationship is cross-cultural. So she's on her planet, you're on yours, and somehow the two of you have to meet.
That's right. That's right, for sure. And one thing I do like that you mentioned before as well is it doesn't hurt to remind your partner what it is that you're looking for. And that just, because the person's in their own adaptive child or on their own planet, like you just said. And so you don't always know. But if my wife and I are having a conversation, no, not an argument, anything like that, she's like, hey, I would just like you to listen and say that instead of trying to figure this out. Because like it's during the day, I just figure things out. Like that's my job for a living. It's like, that's what I do for work. But if she mentions that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. It is my job to listen either way, but just that like one line, hey, I'd love to be able to have a conversation, not try to figure it out, just talk about this. Like, okay. And I would then have to keep that in my mind.
That's great. And it's a sign of a healthy relationship that she feels comfortable putting that out. That's what I call being proactive about your relationship instead of reactive. What most of us are taught to do in this culture is nothing. We're passive. We get what we get, and then we complain about it. That's the worst behavioral modification program I've ever heard of. I want people to be less reactive on the back end and more emboldened in the front end. Ask for what you want. Help your partner out. This is what I call helping them win. Help empower your partner to come through for you because you want them to come through for you. It's good for everybody.
Well, I like that you said too, it's very difficult. You should not get mad at your partner if you have not told them what it is that you're looking for. Because a lot of times they have no idea like what they did wrong or what they're looking for. You just say like, well, how can I make things better? Because if you don't let me know, I'm not sure how to do that.
That not always, there's never a guarantee, but often that is a golden question. If your partner is upset or triggered about anything, particularly you, but anything, you just look them in the eye, be gentle, not harsh, and say, is there something I could say or do right now that would help you feel better, honey? I'm sorry you feel bad. And when they tell you, if it's not jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge, give it to them. This is what I call, and I teach men this across the board, learning to be a generous gentleman. That's what I want guys to be. Your partner wakes you up at 11:30 at night because she's worried about little Timmy. Your adaptive child, first automatic response, what the hell? You say, take a breath and say to yourself, what would a generous gentleman do right now? And I'm particularly interested in being an emotionally generous gentleman. Okay, let's talk for 10 minutes about Timmy, and we'll talk more about it in the morning. It won't kill you. I'll tell you advice. Yeah. I'll tell you a story. So my kids are in their 30s now, but when they were little, my wife, Belinda, is a full-time private practice, just like I do. She's a family therapist. But she would wake up with the kids when they were little babies. And I remember it was about the third night in a row that one of our kids started crying. And I get that boom, 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 go feed the kid. And I'm like, Belinda, the Harvard Couples Conference is tomorrow morning. I'm going to be speaking in front of 1,000 people. I just can't. You got to do it. And my wife said something to me that changed my life. You want to hear what she said?
Yeah, absolutely.
She said, give the lecture tired.
That's great. That's really great.
That's what I call being a family man.
Yes.
And I teach people how to be family men and women. You stretch, you give. You move outside of your comfort zone, it's good for you.
Well, and it's you putting your relationship first. It's not just you or, any one person. I think that, it is starting to, again, look at the overall relationship. So I think that's great advice. One other thing that I really want people to know about this as well is the core negative image, I believe is what you call it. And it's essentially, you said 2 or 3 adjectives as your go-to thought process for the other person. And it's not a good thing. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Your core, family therapists have a saying that couples have the same fight for 40 years. And the reason why you have the same fight for 40 years is because you're not having it. Your adaptive child is having it for you. So when you're a core negative, the great thing about your negative imagery about your partner is that it tends to be consistent. It's not like the virus that mutates all over the place. You think the same stupid thing about them now that you did 20 years ago. Your CNI, core negative image, is who you see your partner as being when you see them as being impossible. Oh my, I call it looking through the wrong end of the telescope. Oh my God, I can't believe what a blankety blank. I'm hooked. What a dreadful mistake. Good. The way you're seeing her right now, that's your core negative image. And it will be the same way you see her as impossible 40 years from now. It's not going to change. Mm-hmm. Now, what a core negative image is an exaggerated version of you at your worst. Let me say that again. It's an exaggerated version of you at your worst. It's not you at your best. It's not you at baseline. It's not even an accurate description of you. It's a kind of a purple journal, very flowery, exaggerated version. Having said that, it is nevertheless, unless if somebody is really extreme, there are a few extreme exceptions, but rare. With rare exception, your partner's core negative image of you is, drumroll please, true. My wife's core negative image of me is it's five words: a selfish, immature, charming, narcissistic boy. And my core negative image of my wife, Belinda, is that she's an insatiable, critical, controlling, micromanaging witch. Now, I don't mind outing us because this is not a rare heterosexual pairing, mm-hmm. The boy with the witch. So I leave the milk out of the refrigerator, right, when the kids are little. And Belinda comes steaming down the stair. And she's like, I can't believe it. I talked to you about being a better role model for the kids. You said you don't clean up after the blah, 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 blah. On a good day, I can look at her and I could go, she's not talking to me right now. She's talking to a narcissistic man-child who doesn't blah, 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 blah. She's core negative image triggered right now. Okay, maybe I don't have to take it so personally. But before I started working on it, if she came at me with that, your partner's core negative image of you, well, guess what? This is what makes it so intriguing. Trigger your core negative image of her. Mm. And so now it's CNI meets CNI, and it's like blah, 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 blah. It's like Belinda says, you left the milk out of the refrigerator, blah, 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 blah. And I go, oh, God, there you go, making all this stuff. If it's a carton of milk, I'll get another. You don't have to be, oh, there you go, not being accountable. I knew you were an irresponsible child. Oh, there you go, being overly, and our CNIs just get reinforced over and over and over again. You want to know the way out?
Yes, absolutely.
It's exactly like those Chinese finger puzzles. The more you pull against your partner's CNI, argue with them, the tighter it's going to get. If you lean into it and accept the germ of truth in it, boom, people get disarmed. Belinda, you're right. I can be irresponsible. It was irresponsible to leave that milk out. I'm going to do the best I can do. Here's the trick. Once you know your partner's CNI of you, and they know yours, which you have to do that very gently, that exercise. Once they know and you have operating instructions. Belinda sees me as an immature, charming man-child. Okay? I know that anything I do that's irresponsible or immature is going to trigger her. Mm-hmm. I also know that anything that I do that's super responsible, that's very thoughtful, she will love. That wouldn't be true for another person, but I know it's true for Belinda. The opposite behavior of your partner's CNI will get you heaven.
It's worth the work right there. Yes.
Repeating the behavior of your partner's CNI will get you hell. This is a compass teaching you where to go.
That's great. And I love, you give an example, which holds true for me for sure, is just showing up 10, 15, 20 minutes later than you said you were going to be. So for me, I lose track of time, sometimes end of day. I try to get home at a certain time because dinner will be ready. And of course, I want to make sure that I'm not holding up the whole family. But there will be times where I'm 15, 20 minutes late. And now, okay, I didn't give any notice that I was going to be later. So the one thing now that I try to do is let my wife know earlier if I'm going to be late. And it's just basically saying, but at the same time, she even just assumes well, that still might not even be hold the case, because for me, I am, I guess, in some way, if I go back to it, putting my work or what I'm doing above hers and the rest of the family. So it's a different way for me to look at it and trying to be more responsible in that way as well.
Listen, your relationship is your biosphere. This is what I'm writing about in my new book. The mistake of individualism, the mistake of patriarchy, is that we're outside of nature and we're above it, dominating it like God. Both of those things are delusions. We're not apart from nature, and we certainly aren't in control of nature. We are inside nature. We're one part of our environment. Your relationship, your marriage, your family is like your biosphere. You breathe it. Now, you can choose to pollute your biosphere over here with temper tantrum, for example, or being 40 minutes late instead of 15. But you're going to breathe in that pollution over here when your partner gets mad or distant or has a reaction. Mm-hmm. I don't talk to people about selfless altruism. I talk to people about enlightened self-interest. Happy wife, happy life. It's in my interest to keep this biosphere moving nicely because I'm inside of it. Like somebody said to me once, why should I work so hard to please my wife? You know what I said? Because you live with her. Hello.
No, but it does make sense when you look at it that way. Is like you're making them happy. And if they're happy, there's at least some level to you that's going to be then happier as well. Whether it should be or shouldn't be, a lot of times it just is. It's nicer to be in a loving relationship than one where you're arguing, every single day. So I agree that, if it doesn't cost you a lot and put you out or hurt you, then why not? Why not do that?
You came right up with the litmus test. What is this going to cost me? Right? Your wife wakes you up at 11:30 with a worry about a kid. You got a big podcast the next morning. What will 10 minutes of listening to her cost you? Now, if your wife wants one kid to go to this school and you definitely want them to go to that school, then giving in will really cost you something. Maybe it's worth the fight. Have it. But if your wife asks you for a piece of toast and you feel, suffocated because she's bossing you around, give her the toast. What will it cost you?
That is a good way to look at it too. And I think that, when we have these types of conversations, it doesn't mean that, everything is always just giving and just, pacifying the other individual, because that's not healthy either. But it's being able to have these adult conversations, not as our adaptive child, but as adults in that prefrontal cortex to say, and I think that you're giving people a framework to have these conversations. And even if they were to read your book and they did it as a couple and they were able to start to work through some of these questions and then potentially take one of your courses and start to get more involved in this, there's not a lot of downsides to that because you start to learn more about each other. And when you learn more about each other, you're a little gentler in the approach, hopefully, that you're going to take, because again, we're dealing with children. We're dealing with us, as children, and hopefully you are gentler with your children.
Yeah, let me tell you a story. We've been talking a lot. I like to tell stories. This is an illustration of somebody's adaptive child. True story. Guy came to me on the brink of divorce. Wife was going to leave him. He was a liar. He was a chronic liar. He lied about everything. His wife said, if you ask him what brand shoes he's wearing, he'll say they're wearing sneakers. I mean, he'll lie about anything. He said, what did you have for lunch? You know, he'll lie. So that's his adaptive child. That's what I call his dysfunctional stance, the way he handles himself in the relationship. He's a liar. Okay, once I have that, the next thing I do is I travel back to the family of origin childhood. Where did this adaptation come from? And if I got somebody who's a master at lying or evasion, my next question is, who tried to control you? You see, show me the thumbprint and I'll tell you about the thumb. This guy's a master evader. Who was he evading as a child? Well, his father was a military man who was all over him, utterly controlling how he stood, how many times he brushed his teeth, how he used his knife. I mean, the guy was all over him. Control, control, control. I said, what did you do? He looked at me and smiled and he said, I lied. I learned to tell my father what he wanted to hear and go off to the side and do my business. I said, you're still doing that. They came back 2 weeks later and they were all smiles. This is a true story. I said, okay, there's a story here. What's going on? So there is a story.
So you were able to allow him to become more self-aware. Was that it? Now he could catch himself doing it?
That's right. That's right. And he had empathy for the part of him that would lie. You don't take your adaptive child and go, stop it, you're a bad brother. You take your adaptive child and say, okay, where did you learn this? What did it do for you? I ask people to always respect the intelligence of that adaptive child. And so I say to him, learning to lie was such a smart thing for you to do as a little boy. Congratulations. But I do have a saying, adaptive then, maladaptive now. It was just the thing with your father, but she ain't your father and you ain't that little boy. So he comes back and he says, okay, over the weekend, my wife sent me a grocery store with a list. And true to form, I came back with 8 out of 9 things. She says to me, where's the orange juice? And he said, every muscle and nerve in my body was like on the tip of my tongue, was like they were out of it. And I took a breath and I calmed myself down. And I looked at my wife and I said, I forgot it. And she burst into tears. True story. And she said, I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years.
That's amazing.
That's moving beyond your adaptive child into your wise adult.
That's fantastic. And so all of us, I mean, I would say everyone out there, especially people listening to this podcast where they want to better themselves, that these are the steps. These are the steps that we can take as we can begin to become more self-aware. And my last big question I would say to you then is, and you gave away that you should still acknowledge that child is still there, but then by acknowledging, does that begin to heal the wounds, or do you simply start to view it more as an adult?
No, it does start to heal the wounds. The bitter pill you have to swallow, and it is a bitter pill for a lot of us, is at this stage in the game, my friend, the only person who can really consistently be there for that little boy or little girl who lives inside of you is you. You hand that little boy or girl to your partner to take care of, you're in for a stormy time. One of the things I say is maturity comes when we deal with our inner children and don't foist them off on our partners to deal with. That's what maturity is.
Yeah, I really like that because it's true to the same for health as well, which is the domain that we really work in. Is that, even if you work with a therapist or a practitioner, let's even just say once a week, which would be a good amount, but let's say it's once a week, you're still with yourself the other 167 hours. You still need to, go with the flow and be able to work again, because someone like yourself, you're working with 40 people, maybe more besides them each additional week. And it's so much responsibility for other people to take care of you. I think in the end, we do need to care for ourselves.
You can love your partner's little boy or little girl. You can give them a ton of TLC, but they're not your responsibility. My little Terry, who can be an angry little guy, he's my responsibility. And one of the things I say, Stephen, is when an inner child kicks up, put your arms around them, put them on your lap, love them, listen to what they have to say, and demote them. Take their sticky hands off the steering wheel. You're not driving the bus. You're in the back seat. I'm driving the bus. Well, when Belinda is having a fight with me, I literally, and I teach my clients this too, I literally take my little Terry, who's about 8 years old, and I put him behind me physically. He can hold on to my jacket. And I make a deal with him. I say, you know that blast of anger coming at us? I'm going to take the hit, not you. It will stop with me, my big body. You're protected back there. That's my part of the deal. Here's your part of the deal, young Terry. Don't try and deal with Belinda. Let me deal with her. I can do it a lot better than you can. And so that's another description of parenting, reparenting the parts of us that are desperately in need of being reparented, but don't ask somebody else to do it for you.
I really like that because I've looked into, kind of learned about neuro-linguistic programming more from I would say PTSD and different standpoints like that, just to have a reference, because I'm certainly not a NLP practitioner, but everything is about imagery. So if you could imagine that little Terry, or we'll say little Steve, and putting them behind you, then again, you're then the protector. You're there to help out, and also you're the one in charge. And it goes, I don't know if you've ever heard this quote before, but since we're exchanging quotes here, there's a great one by Jim Rohn that says, I'll take care of me for you if you'll take care of you for me. And so our responsibility is us. It's like, hey, well, like I can't ask my wife to, help my adaptive child. I need to be the one to help with that and serve that. So, and by doing that, then I'm actually serving her, which is quite nice, I think, as well.
You're serving the relationship.
Yes, exactly.
You're serving the biosphere. I ask people to not think in terms of win, lose, I give to her, she gets, I don't. You don't make sacrifices to your partner. You make sacrifices to the marriage because the marriage will sustain you, and it's in your interest to do that. There is no win-lose. When you're in win-lose land, you're in your adaptive child.
I like that as well. That's really great. So we could go back and forth with so many great details here today. I would love for people to go more in depth. We gave people about an hour of content today to really start to open their eyes about how they can take their relationship to that next level. I wouldn't say even just repair. Yes, repair, but also no matter how good your relationship is, I think it could probably get better. And so let everyone know. I mean, again, I really loved listening to Fierce Intimacy, which is on Audible. We'll link that up for sure today. The New Rules of Marriage as well to follow along in the paperback book edition. Tell our listeners as well how they can learn more.
Well, go to my website is my first suggestion. Is to just type in my name, Terry, Terry, Real, Real, just like you think it is, Terry Real. That'll take you to my website. You can download Fierce Intimacy from the website. And in just a few weeks, you'll be getting notices about an online course for you, for the general public, on exactly the skills we're talking about. Not just the theory, but really getting to the nuts and bolts of how you speak, how you listen, how you respond, how you cherish, what to do when your partner's being a jerk and you're not, and how to sustain your practice, whether the relationship is going where you want or not, how for you to be okay in the midst of that. Those are the skills that we'll be covering in the course.
That's fantastic. And so it will also work for people that their partner's not interested at this time in working on themselves or their relationship, but if they do the work themselves, they could get a lot of benefit as well. Is that correct?
They can, and they can shift the relationship often. And also we're inviting singles as well. Individuals can look, relationship skills are relationship skills, whether it's your boss or your brother or your kid or your dog, it's the same skill. So whether you come as a couple or you come as an individual, you'll learn a lot, I promise.
That's fantastic. One question I always like to ask towards the end of the show is, what is the biggest mistake you would say? Like, what's the one thing that you want people to know that they typically do wrong? They say, okay, I know what Terry's talking about. I'm going to get started. I'll do this. Ultimately, why do they end up back seeing you? Where do they go wrong?
If I have one thing to say, I would say this: keep it positive. people do not respond well to criticism. Every criticism has in the center of it an ask, a request. If I don't like this, ask yourself, well, then what would be better? What would I like? The complaint comes to us. We're negatively biased in our brains. The complaint will come first. So do a little discipline, get into that wise adult and say, well, okay, enough about what I don't want. What would I like? I talk about moving from a negative past focus, you did that wrong, to a positive future focus. And it's as concrete as this. The shift from, I don't like how you're talking to me, becomes, hey, I want to hear what you have to say. Could you tone it down so I could really listen? Two ways of saying the same thing. One is skilled and one is a fight.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that's great advice. Where can people connect with you online?
terryreal.com. Go to my website. There's a button that says contact me. You can write me an email. I will get the email. You will get responded to. And that's the best way to begin a dialogue. So
Excellent.
come to the course. Come to the course. It'll be fun.
For sure. We're going to link that up today on the show notes page. We'll link up previous books. We'll link up your Audible book as well, your website. And I have no doubt that our community will want to learn more. So, Terry, thank you so much for being on the show here today.
Oh, it was really nice being interviewed by you. I have to say, you did your homework. I really feel quite seen. So thank you and congratulations. You're doing great work on this show.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.